So today we're going to be taking a look at a scenario where Brazil invades the rest of South America. Now Brazil is the strongest country in South America and the 10th strongest country in the world, but is it enough to invade the entire continent? There are 12 other countries other than Brazil within this continent, but maybe Brazil has a chance. So if you guys do enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. Go ahead and predict who you think will win this video in the comments, and let's go ahead and jump right into this. Now there is one clear factor that we do have to address, and that is that France is in this continent, specifically French Guiana, which is a department of France, and France is the 6th strongest country in the world. So I mean, stronger than Brazil, and the French troops going over here and fighting in South America would definitely put up a problem for the country itself. So in this video and this video only, French Guiana will be receiving independence. And since this war can't really start in a plausible way, since Brazil does have allies in this continent, we're just going to start it with Brazil being on the red team and the rest of the continent being on the blue team. And just like that, everyone is now at war. So we're going to also assume that everyone is mobilized and ready to fight, which means that it's going to be interesting. The geography of South America is pretty easy going, except for the mountainous areas, which are over here, and then of course the giant rainforest that covers like half of the continent. So the mountains are for the blue team's advantage, but the rainforest is for Brazil's advantage. Speaking of Brazil, they are the first to make a move as they start their invasion of French Guiana, or I guess at this point it would just be Guiana Part 2, since you know Guiana already exists. But Brazil sends troops up into these 3 small countries in the north of the continent, and they are easily able to establish a solid front line, which eventually wipes out Suriname and of course French Guiana, and Guiana itself is close to capitulation. Down south we see another Brazilian army enter into Uruguay, another pretty weak country. They move in and eventually cut the country into 2. But it is here that they do meet Argentine troops on the border and their stalemate is established. Up north we have Colombia and Venezuela working together, which I never thought I would say that, but they do work together to start to edge into Brazil. Now this area is mostly rainforest, so not really doing anything for them. Also, it's very difficult to invade. We see Peru doing the same thing, although once again, rainforest, not easy to do. And Bolivia attempts to do the same. Not easy to do. So from here, Brazil starts an offensive into Paraguay. Now, the blue team was expecting this because Paraguay is one of the weaker countries, but they get pretty far in, further in than the blue team anticipated. But once again, they are eventually stopped, but from here, they do start to invade this half of Bolivia. It is also here that we see Brazilian troops start to push back Bolivian troops. So overall, the front is going in favor for Brazil, but there are a few difficulties on both sides. So once Brazil gets over here, it's not going to be fun, and then once the blue team, well, I guess when the blue team tries to invade the rainforest area, it's just not going to invade, and it's not going to happen. So the blue team is kind of out of luck here, but Brazil might also be out of luck because that is a lot of countries. It's also going to be near to impossible to occupy all of this. There's a very distinct cultural difference between Brazil and the rest of South America, and of course the language itself. Brazil speaks Portuguese, the rest of the countries speak Spanish and I guess French. But down south we see Argentina troops finally breaking that stalemate and pushing Brazil further out of Uruguay. Up north we see the same in Paraguay, although this is less effective, and Brazil launches a campaign over towards Bolivia from the south. They eventually enter into the country, but are stopped. From here, they set up a pretty large camp in this area. Now, of course, setting up camp that far in is dangerous, especially considering that they could easily just take this back. So they brought in their front line, although it is at a pretty heavy cost. Back up north, we have Peruvian troops, once again entering into Brazil. These guys, I don't really know what their goal is. I mean, this entire area is just, you don't want to take it. You don't want to have that. But the more important fighting is going to be happening along this front line down here. But Brazil is focusing the most of their military down here. Yeah, it's basically just Argentina versus Brazil for now. But we do have a front line that isn't going well for Brazil, and that's again back up north in Guyana. Venezuelan troops manage to push back Brazilian troops and start to liberate the coast of Suriname until they eventually liberate all of it. From here, they enter into French Guiana, but are eventually stopped. We have them thickening up their front line up here and pushing back the Brazilians even more. On the Bolivian border, we have Brazilian troops completely pushing them out of their country, and from here they enter into the country themselves. So now Brazil's front lines are looking very good in the south, not so good over here in the northwest, but pretty decent in the north. Speaking of the north, the blue team manages to break another stalemate and pushes down further, but then again they are stopped. So now Brazil is starting to see a problem, and that problem is supply lines. So Argentina, being the 2nd strongest country in South America, is most likely pumping resources up into these countries and up into Venezuela, so they kind of want to stop that supply line from running. The only problem is that if they try to invade over towards the coast, there's the mountains, and they can't get past the mountains, which means Argentina can just send things on the coast, and then of course they can also send it by boat. But we're going to assume that Brazil has some kind of naval control over here, so that kind of prevents it from going this way. Instead it has to go up this way. But nonetheless, Brazil wants to cut off land access. The easiest point from their border would probably be over here in Peru, cutting straight over, but that leaves Bolivia and Chile still still getting access. So that's what they're kind of trying to do here, although the defenses over here are not letting them do that. So Brazil takes it all out on Bolivia and starts to invade the country full scale. We see a mass amount of Brazilian troops which were being stationed on the border starting to flood in, and eventually they reached the mountains. Now this offensive went extremely well for Brazil, and they didn't even have that many losses compared to Bolivia. Overall though, the general planning and logistics went into this full-scale invasion, which means they are lacking in other places such as Uruguay, who at this point is now seeing no Brazilian troops in their country, and instead we have blue team troops crossing in from the south. Speaking of blue team troops, we have a larger scale going in near Peru, although once again this is near too impossible to invade, so they're kind of just walking through a rainforest and probably getting killed by a lot of things. So with Brazil's massive success in Bolivia, they now start to reorganize their military and want to focus in on more areas. Of course, they still aim to do this, but for now they can hold off and are going to focus on other places such as the north, where recently they have been being pushed back. So now Brazil sends up a bunch of troops, and eventually they manage to cut off a few Venezuelan divisions. Kind of forgot there for a second. But these guys are cut off and they eventually surrender. Following this is a massive amount of Brazilian pushbacks, which go very successfully. They even go around into Venezuela and threaten a portion of the armies with encirclement. Brazilian troops kick back in the south of their country, and there is a pretty small encirclement made, nothing significant, but it is wiped out. From here, Brazilians enter into Venezuela and start to invade up towards the coast. But it is here that they stop, because if they go any further, they risk of running out of supplies due to Venezuela's push into their country over here. So they send in their specially trained troops, which are like rainforest people. They're probably like swinging from the vines and stuff, but those guys do extremely well, and they push the Venezuelans out of their southern border, Brazil's northern border. Now Colombia sends troops into Venezuela in order to stop Brazil's advance. But unfortunately, Brazil's advance is a little too much, and they start to get near Venezuela's capital. Those Colombian troops arrive, and it is then stalemated. From here, Brazil starts to focus in on consolidating their front in the south, which they do so pretty easily. And that is another huge success for Brazil's campaign against the rest of South America. But once again, these big full-scale invasions do have their problems. It focuses Brazil's entire logistics team on the area and kind of leads for vulnerability in other aspects, and those aspects do include their other major front, where we have Bolivia pushing back and recapturing their capital. I think it's in the center, could be wrong, I don't know, I'm not really good with capital cities. But yeah, Bolivia starts their counteroffensive, and this goes pretty well until it doesn't go well and they're eventually stopped. Down south, Argentina continues to expand up north, but Brazil's defenses down here are protecting their major cities. We see Argentina help Paraguay kick the Brazilians out in the south of their country, but overall Brazil's logistics are reorganized and they eventually stop the blue team's advance. Speaking of stopping the blue team's advance, you're going to stop something else here. We're also going to assume that everyone's using reserves. I mean, this is like the war of a lifetime. This continent doesn't see any action, and this is a pretty big thing. So I'm talking entire military, wartime ready, reserves. They're probably even conscripting. It's not pretty. But Brazil slams a bunch of troops into this area over here, and they effectively get to the mountains. We're going to ignore they exist, and they cut off the blue team in South America into two. Not the biggest issue, a little inconvenient for Chile and Argentina, but they can still just kind of do that. And the Brazilian Navy kind of has to go like this, or I guess like this, which I don't know if you're allowed to send warships through here. So, I mean, it's kind of effective. Not really though. But with the blue team cut in two, they now start to focus on capitulating Bolivia, which they are pretty close to doing. Up north, they push over and capture the capital of Venezuela. And from here, it's essentially just Colombian troops as the Venezuelan troops flee into Colombia. Not a very proud thing to do. But overall, Brazil sees success in picking off these weaker countries. I mean, Ecuador is the only weak country that remains. I guess Uruguay also. I kind of forgot they exist, in sort of Paraguay, although they're barely holding on. Speaking of barely holding on, they give up, and Argentina is the only one occupying this country now. So now it's time for Brazil's third major counteroffensive, which is, well, actually the first counteroffensive. Technically this was a counteroffensive, but this was an offensive, so second counteroffensive, third major breakthrough. They're pushing everyone out over here, and from here they start to make their first mistake, which is mobilizing too many troops. That takes a lot of supplies, and now that they're pushing into Peru, they're kind of pushing out on every front, which is not going to be good for them. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure they have the capability, but overall they're going to start to lack, and they're going to start to be pushed back. Poor Paraguay never sees the end of violence as Argentina re-pushes into the country and finally meets the border of Brazil. From here we see a collapse of the front over here for Brazil, and we see blue team troops entering in over here. Up north, Colombia re-enters into Brazil, although this is kind of a useless offensive. But what isn't a useless offensive is their pushback on the Venezuelan coast, which isn't held very tightly by Brazilian forces. They even managed to encircle Brazil. These troops are cut off, and along with them was the logistical planner for this area. know I'm using logistics a lot, but kind of works, I guess. But with that guy gone, they kind of have to get another guy, and that guy is not very close to the front line, so Colombia is able to push them back. They even start to push down towards Guyana in their own spearhead. So now with the northern front starting to not go well for Brazil, they kind of have to make a decision here. Brazil doesn't even really know if they're capable of taking over the entire South American continent. In real life, it isn't really plausible because of resistance and rebellions, and overall the military of South America would probably be on the same scale as Brazil, if not stronger, and that is factoring reserves and stuff, so probably stronger. But yeah, Brazil has to figure out what to do here, and they decide that what they need to do is take out the strongest on the blue team, which is Argentina, and from there they'll take out the second strongest, which is probably Colombia, and then from there, with the two strongest countries out of the war, they can easily take over the smaller countries. So Brazil makes the decision, which is probably smart, although they might not be smart if they're not careful, and that is to pull troops out of this area except for French Guiana. Why do they hold on to French Guiana? I have no clue. But they also hold on to the southern part of Guyana. Actually, let me just change that. Yeah, that's better. So they hold on to this area, but they pull troops out of everywhere else. This includes Peru. And in Peru, they're not very careful, which leads to the Peruvians crossing the border. But that is eventually stopped, so no big worry there. And we even see them withdrawing some troops on the northern Bolivian front line. Only some, though. They don't want to risk getting cut off over here. So with these major pullbacks, South America is kind of scared of what Brazil has installed next. But what they do have is probably the smartest thing they've done so far. Full-scale 500,000 troop invasion of Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. These troops smack across the border in an assault that Argentina and the rest never saw coming. Uruguay capitulates in a matter of weeks. Same thing with Paraguay. Eventually, these guys enter into Argentina itself. Buenos Aires, which is right here, it's not very far from occupied Uruguay, is under constant naval bombardment. We see a couple Brazilian divisions push down in an attempt to encircle the city, but the Argentina defense is strong. Although it's not strong enough, as an encirclement is eventually made, and the siege of Buenos Aires starts. Meanwhile, the rest of the Brazilian army starts to fold through Argentina, and after a couple months, we're left with this. Lots of planning for this one, and it went extremely well for them, as Argentina is not in the best of conditions. But once again, we are talking about months, so let's go ahead and take a look at the other front lines. More specifically up north, where Colombia and Peru have connected their fronts and have proceeded further into Brazil. We also see Venezuela popping back out, and overall, Brazilian forces up north here in the Guyana area have been pushed back. Technically, not a huge loss for Brazil, as they now have the strongest country under their thumb, but it will be a pain for them to take this back, if they can. After a few more weeks, we finally see the capturing of Buenos Aires, which leads to a fall through of the Argentinian government and a disorganization of their military. Argentina eventually surrenders. Here we are left with an interesting situation for Chile, who, I mean, the country shape kind of says enough. Brazil just kind of cuts them in half, which hurts them a little bit. This area doesn't have any mountains in it, so it's soon to fall within a couple months. And I doubt Brazilian troops would go down this far, but we're just going to color in just to say it is. And just like that, Brazil has captured all of southern and South America. Is it going well for their occupation? No, I doubt it. But they do have Bolivia and Chile encircled. Once again, we were talking about months here, so this front line up north is further broadened into the Brazilian rainforest. Not too sure what they're accomplishing here, but we do see a major breakthrough for the blue team as they capture all of the Guyana area. We even see a breakthrough on this front line, and they start to near their first major city. So yeah, the war in South America is going good and bad for Brazil. It's going good because they have Argentina and half of Chile, and of course all of Uruguay and Paraguay, but it's going bad because they having a hard time occupying this, and then of course they're being invaded from the north. So Brazil does something interesting. Basically, they don't want to get scammed out of a peace deal too early, so they withdraw a lot of troops in Argentina and Chile, which leads to a flood through of blue team troops. That was kind of their plan though, because these troops are now being moved from other areas. They smack into Bolivia, while also using their Tarzan troops to push back the blue team in the north. From here, they re-enter into the Guyana area, push back the Venezuelans, lose their connection to the coast, and a good portion of the south of Southern America. So now, we have Brazil in a checkmate scenario. They just played their final move, and if the blue team doesn't opt for peace, they are probably screwed. I say that because all of Argentina will be liberated, half of Bolivia, which is already liberated, will be reliberated. And then, in accordance to that, a majority of their troops just smacked into the Guyana area as well as the rainforest area, which leaves them open over here in this particular area. I'm sure they do have some sort of defense in the south, but in the north it's just purely offense, nothing to defend. So they send a peace offering to each country, and amazingly enough, they agree to it. So a peace conference is held in Santiago, and of course this is later known as the Treaty of Santiago. But let's go ahead and take a look at said treaty. All right, taking a look at this peace treaty here, we have a pretty large amount of exchanges taking place. First of all, we'll go over the annexation. So we have Brazil annexing all of French Guiana and Suriname, as well as half of Guyana. They took over half of Paraguay and a good portion of Uruguay. Now on for the land exchanges, we have Colombia getting a little slither of land over here out of Brazil. We see Venezuela connect 2 points, so the straight line is basically just like connecting 2 points that used to look like this. And then finally for Paraguay, they just got partitioned by everyone. So if you can kind of imagine, this is such a bad drawing, but Paraguay kind of looked like that, and we can see how it got partitioned by everyone. But you'd think this giant conflict would lead to a resolve of aggression in the continent, but no, it doesn't. And in a few years' time, we see another conflict break out, which is a lot different than we remember it. But hey, that's not for this video. Anyway, if you guys did enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. It really helps me out and shows me what videos I need to do more of, what videos you guys are interested in, all of that. On the last video, which was what if Finland formed an empire, I asked for you guys' support. And if it got enough support, I would continue the Empire series. And that video outperformed every single video in the past couple of weeks in likes. Like, it got 4,000 likes within the first 10 hours, and that is crazy. Like, I still can't wrap my head around how crazy, like, that's a lot. That's a lot of likes, and the video was only at like 22,000 views. So that's like, if you do the ratio, that's like 1 in every, I'm not good at math. It's like every 5 people someone liked the video, like 5.5 or something like that. That's crazy. That's a lot of turnout. I wasn't expecting that, but that really speaks to me and shows me that you guys want to see more of the Empire series. So it will officially be coming back from not coming. Wait, what? It will officially be returning to the channel. I'll probably be doing some more popular countries and maybe be getting into some of the less popular countries. I did Finland, so it's only fair I do Sweden and Norway, Denmark. I'm not really sure what other countries I could do. Portugal, they're kind of in a bad spot for an empire though. Maybe this, but that would be, I don't want to see the comments for that one. But yeah, I don't have a map of every empire, so I'm probably gonna make one of those soon just so I know. But anyway, once again, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.